So Simon, we've had a nice snapshot of what we found on the wire, and we spoke a little bit about standards. So could you share your view of standards? We've got the NCSC, we've got NIST, and now NIST 2, and you've got a Venari standard. So can you talk a little bit about those, and why did you come up with your own standard? Because I'm sure the government agencies are good enough.
Absolutely. So good question. So we typically look at, there's a plethora of regulation depending on where you are. If you're in Singapore or Switzerland or the UK, there are different regulations that might apply. NIST is a very wide-ranging regulation. NCSC is very UK specific, obviously, and some great recommendations that have actual detail in what the encryption requires to conform to it. I'll talk a little bit about what's included in that, and then I'll talk about why we decided that wasn't maybe right for us. So when you're talking about the regulatory parts of encryption, you need to think about TLS protocol version. You need to think about the key exchange mechanism, the key derivation, the authentication mechanisms, the actual encryption itself, and also the cipher suite as a whole. So there's a bunch of different variables or parameters involved in this. The regulations don't always explicitly state all of those. NIST is a great example, as these are wide-ranging standards that are part of larger standards and recommendations that cover much more than just encryption. We found that NIST, for example, will give one recommendation in one report, and then a slightly newer report will actually be slightly different to that. So we found a few inconsistencies in some of the regulatory recommendations. That's not a mistake by NIST, that's just an evolution over time. We are clearly a smaller and more agile organisation than NIST and the NCSC, so we're able to be a bit more current with the state-of-the-art research. We have a lot of examples of things that we've seen in production environments that give us more insight into what's reasonable, what's accepted. We're also looking at malware research and reverse engineering to understand what techniques are being used. So there's lots of different additional drivers that made us really think that our job is to try and simplify this world of encryption for our customers, to simplify, to really shine a light and give a simple, manageable, easy to digest view of encryption across an organization. And to do that, I wanted to be able to convey some kind of simple risk scoring or simple analysis to portray the status of an encrypted attack surface. And that's why we have our own, because it allows us to tweak it as well and change it. We are typically more exacting, let's say, than some of these other standards, which I mentioned earlier are really the basic level. They're the beginning level of security. So I feel that our recommendations are strong.
So just to play back there, what I heard you say is Venari recommendation is more of a best practice of how to use, as well as be clear about how you maintain visibility. And I also took from what you said there is you're working using a malware definition here. You're very much working in the day zero space of the standard, where you can see gaps that haven't yet been filled, and you'll fill in those within your Venari best practice. So it's not a replacement for the NIST and NCSC.
No.
In actual fact, what you're doing is you're still using that. That is your core foundation, your keystone, but you're grooming out a lot of the ambiguities and misunderstandings because the standards are so broad to give people a more crisp view of what they should and could use, and more importantly, keep up to date with the day zero thing. And for the viewers, can we have a quick conversation about what is day zero? Because it's a word that's used by many people. But in the context of going to talk to people, I find that many people have a a different perspective of what day zero actually means?
So there's multiple ways of looking at this, and I would use the phrase 0 day. A single vulnerability, which may or may not be known, so if it's not known, then the exploit, there may be multiple ways to exploit that vulnerability. We can also use the term 0 day, less commonly, but around attacks or campaigns by threat groups where there is novel infrastructure being used. And when I say novel infrastructure, I mean the command and control infrastructure, the certificates used, the servers used, the IP addresses used, the hash of the binary, the different phases of a multi-stage attack can be obfuscated and changed. So you could also use the phrase 0 day about that, where typically they may obfuscate the way the exploit is used as well. So it's really hard. The whole thing about security is there's an adversary. It's playing chess. And even nowadays, it's not just a human adversary. It's AI, ML, and models that you're competing against. So we actually make heavy use of ML in our platform, really for looking at anomalies and things that are not expected. And we use it in our research as well. So we've got quite a large team of PhDs and scientists looking into all of this for us, so that we can have this standard and apply it to the real world traffic that we see to get real insight into actually what's going on. And this is part of the reason we have our own standard. Now, I would say that if an organisation just said, right, we're going to go NIST, I would applaud that. Absolutely, that's the right step in the right direction. And then at least you have some consistent expectation of the traffic and the encryption that's being negotiated in your production environments, both externally and internally. That's kind of step one, is deciding what the standard is, measuring what you have, and then starting on the plan, the roadmap, to start enforcing it and fixing the problems. Where there'll be like an 80-20 rule, where the first 3 things you fix will probably fix a lot of the issues in terms of, let's say, for example, the standard encryption settings on your externally facing servers. What they accept or not, for example, would be a great first step. So what we actually do is we look for TTPs, which are tools, tactics and procedures, or tools, techniques and procedures, which are the way of going about things for the bad guys. For the different threat groups have their own TTPs typically, which can change, but they change less often. So what we're doing is we're trying to identify, in addition, the tools that are being used to generate these sessions. So, for example, if I see a TLS session on my perimeter that I can see from Venari was created by PowerShell, so it was a PowerShell command that created a TLS connection going out, that might be really interesting to me. It might not be, but it's certainly a clue, an indicator that I might want to know about in conjunction with other things that would allow me to get more color, more understanding of the traffic going over my environment. Obviously, things like Colt Strike, that's obviously more of a red alert, and Metasploit also can be used for bad. So understanding the OS, the browser, the tool that's being used to generate the application that's being used to generate the TLS, that adds visibility. And that's really, really what we're trying to do, is give people an understanding of what is this traffic without endpoint agents, without participating in the encryption itself, only by looking at the passive metadata that's publicly viewable from outside the encrypted session.
So would it be fair to sum up and say you're really focused at protecting the TLS sessions from the entry point position of malware, which basically is, that's where it starts. What malware is then used beyond that once you've gained entry is kind of neither here nor there. What you're doing is securing up logical access to a session that would otherwise be weak if it's done incorrectly.
Yeah, it's all about the visibility. It's all about empowering analysts with more information. And the other point there is, not just throwing data, but actually giving information, the next layer or two up of understanding. It's giving, actionable intelligence that can be used to gain an advantage over the bad guys.